December 26, 1900. The steamer Hesperus cuts through the gray, churning waters of the Atlantic, approaching one of the most remote outposts on Earth. The destination is Eilean Moor, the largest of the Flannan Isles, a cluster of jagged rocks jutting out from the sea, 20 miles west of the Outer Hebrides. Captain Harvey sounds the ship's whistle. A shrill blast that echoes against the cliffs. He waits for a response. A flag. A flare. A wave from the gallery. But there is only silence. 3 veteran keepers were stationed on that rock. 3 men whose sole duty was to keep the light burning for passing ships. But as the Hesperus drew closer, the crew realized something was terribly wrong. The lamp was dark. The flagstaff was bare. And on the landing slip, usually bustling with activity to greet the relief boat, there was no one. In the annals of maritime history, disappearances at sea are common. But men don't just vanish from a locked lighthouse. Unless, of course, they were never truly alone on that rock. To understand the horror of the Flannan Isles, you have to understand the isolation. The locals call these islands the Seven Hunters. For centuries, they were considered holy ground, inhabited only by sheep and the spirits of old monks. Superstition held that you never stayed the night on Eilean Moor. It was a place for the dead, not the living. But the Northern Lighthouse Board didn't deal in superstition. They dealt in engineering. In 1899, they finished construction of a lighthouse meant to tame this wild stretch of ocean. It was a fortress of brick and iron, designed to withstand the full fury of the North Atlantic. The 3 men on duty that December were James Duckett, the principal keeper, a man with over 20 years of experience; Thomas Marshall, the second assistant; and Donald MacArthur, the occasional keeper, a hardened veteran of the coast. These were steady, reliable men. They knew the sea. They knew the protocol. They were not men prone to flights of fancy or negligence. Moore and the crew of the Hesperus searched every inch of the island. They found twisted iron railings at the west landing, bent like wire by some colossal force. A supply box, weighing hundreds of pounds, had been ripped from its moorings and smashed apart far above the high tide line. But the most disturbing evidence wasn't found on the cliffs. It was found on the desk, inside the logbook. The final entries, written by Thomas Marshall, describe a weather event that shouldn't have existed. December 12th, gale north by northwest. Sea lashed to fury. Never seen such a storm. This is where reality begins to fracture. Marshall wrote that the principal keeper, James Ducat, a stoic, quiet man, was very quiet. He noted that Donald MacArthur was crying. Think about that. MacArthur was a brawler, a tough man known for his aggression. For a storm to reduce him to tears, it had to be apocalyptic. The entry for December 13th is even stranger. Storm continued through night. Wind shifted west by north. Ducat quiet. MacArthur praying. And then, the final entry. December 15th, 1 p.m. Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all. Here is the problem. Official weather reports from the Lewis station nearby, and logs from passing ships, confirm that on December 12th, 13th, and 14th. The weather was calm. There was no storm. The sea was flat. So what were they seeing? What was lashing the sea to fury outside their window, invisible to the rest of the world, that drove three hardened men to prayer and madness? The official investigation concluded that the men were swept away by a rogue wave, a freak wall of water that rose up and snatched them from the landing. It is the only rational explanation for the damage found at the West Landing. But it doesn't explain the logbook. It doesn't explain why they imagined a storm 3 days before the real bad weather arrived. It doesn't explain why the clock stopped. It doesn't explain why 3 men, who knew the tides better than they knew their own wives, would be down at the landing together during a surge. Did the isolation finally break them? Did a shared delusion turn them against one another? Or did something come out of that calm, dark water, something that the locals of the Seven Hunters had warned about for generations? When the lighthouse was automated in 1971, the keepers left for the final time. But even today, those who visit Eilean Mor speak of an oppressive atmosphere. A feeling of being watched from the galleries above. The bodies of Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur were never found. The Atlantic is deep, and it keeps its secrets. But as you look out over that gray, endless horizon, you have to ask yourself. If the logbook was right, and the sea was calm, then what were they praying to?